Eddard Stark arrived at the Red Keep under the scorching sun of early afternoon, the heat rising from the cobblestones in humid waves. King's Landing had a reek to it, but it was not the filth of the city that unsettled him most. It was the oppressive sense that he had stepped into a pit of snakes. The capital had always given him an uneasy feeling, but this time was different. This time, Tywin Lannister was there, long before any talk of the king's untimely death had even begun. Indeed, Lord Tywin, with all his severity and cold menace, had taken up residence in the city shortly after Jon Arryn's passing. Rumors swirled as to why, but none dared say it openly. Some claimed Tywin had come to keep watch over his children, to make sure neither Cersei nor Jaime sullied the Lannister name. Others said he had come to wrest control of the court from the absent-minded King Robert Baratheon. Perhaps both were true, Ned mused, or perhaps neither. Only time would tell. He dismounted with a grunt, stretching his sore back from the long journey. The courtyard of the Red Keep bustled with activity. Gold cloaks, servants, and messengers scurried about like ants, each engrossed in tasks that seemed urgent in the moment. Ser Roderick Castle and the small retinue of Stark men followed in Ned's wake, their northern cloaks drawing curious, sometimes wary stares. The difference between north and south had never felt so keenly. In Winterfell, men might stand about in companionable silence, stoic as the snow and ice that framed their days. Here in King's Landing, nothing was silent. Tongues wagged behind gloved hands, gossip spread like wildfire, and every polite smile seemed undercut by the threat of a whispered secret. Waiting to receive him was Grand Maester Pycelle, resplendent in his heavy chain of office. Beside him stood Lord Peter Baelish, known as Littlefinger, with his mockingbird sigil pinned over his heart. Both men wore welcoming smiles that Ned distrusted instinctively. Pycelle's broad smile was condescending and grandfatherly, while Littlefinger's was sharper, as though he enjoyed some private joke at everyone else's expense. Ned greeted them briefly, wanting little more than to settle into whatever apartments had been prepared for him. He felt tired from the journey, but even more from the knowledge of the burdens he would carry as the new hand of the king. Yet before he could retire, Pycelle informed him that Lord Tywin Lannister had requested an immediate audience in the presence of the king. Ned stiffened. He had expected to see Robert first or even Cersei, but not Tywin. He feared the man's intentions. The rumors of Tywin's brilliance and ruthlessness were known throughout the Seven Kingdoms. He had been the architect of countless Lannister victories, in both the field and at court. If Tywin was determined that something should happen, more often than not, it did. Though Ned was no coward, he could not help feeling a cold knot in his belly as he followed Pycelle and Littlefinger into the expansive corridors leading to the throne room. The Red Keep's throne room was as intimidating as ever, and the Iron Throne itself perched atop a dais of fused and twisted blades, a terrible seat that promised both splendor and pain to whomever claimed it. Robert Baratheon sat slumped in it, looking weary. His once mighty frame had begun to thicken with too many feasts and too much wine. Still, he managed a grin that lit his bearded face the moment he saw Ned. There, before the king, stood Lord Tywin Lannister, towering even in stillness, clad in rich crimson and gold. The emblazoned lion of House Lannister on his doublet was as fierce as the expression on his severe face. His pale green eyes flicked toward Ned, and for a heartbeat, Ned thought he saw the faintest trace of contempt. "Ned," boomed the king, clambering off the Iron Throne with more vigor than one might expect from a man grown so fond of wine. "By the gods, it's about time you got here." Robert's voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings, and many a courtier discreetly stepped back to give the king room. Robert strode down, seized Ned by the shoulders, and crushed him in a bear-like hug. The smell of ale and sweat clung to him, but Ned smiled, returning the embrace as well as he could. Seeing Robert's face, hearing that boisterous laugh again, almost made Ned forget the tensions that roiled beneath the surface of courtly life. "Your Grace," Ned said, inclining his head. Then he glanced at Tywin, whose face remained impassive. "Lord Tywin," he added, giving the Lannister patriarch a measured bow. Tywin gave a curt nod in response, lips pressed in a tight line. Tywin wasted no time on pleasantries. "Lord Stark," he said in a voice cold and distant. "Welcome to King's Landing. I trust your journey was safe." Felt more like a polite formality than genuine concern. Tywin's tone carried the unspoken message. He had not summoned Ned here to trade simple courtesies. Ned was about to speak when Robert's booming voice cut him off. "I'll not have you two speaking of tedious matters in this dreadful hall," said the king. "I grow tired of the blasted thing myself. To my solar at once. We'll speak freely there." With that, he beckoned Ned and Tywin along, ignoring the curious gazes of the courtiers who watched their king stomp down the aisle with New Hand and old Lannister in tow. The king's private solar was smaller, though still grand by any measure. Tapestries of old battles adorned the walls, and a wide window overlooked the city. Robert waved off the servants, leaving only a select few behind, along with Pycelle, Littlefinger, and Lord Varys, who had glided in almost silently. Varys smiled in that disarming way of his, offering a soft greeting to Ned. "Well now," Robert said, dropping heavily into a cushioned chair. "Ned, you are the new hand of the king, and gods know you're the only man I trust. But with Tywin here as well, we'll have no shortage of counsel, will we?" His attempt at levity fell flat. Tywin's face remained unreadable, while Ned allowed only a small smile. He did not relish the idea of grappling with Tywin Lannister for influence over Robert's ear. Tywin folded his hands behind his back. "I serve the realm, your grace," he said plainly. "And you, of course." Robert sniffed, glancing at Ned. "My Lord Hand, it might be best if we begin this new arrangement by discussing the crown's finances. I need gold, Ned, a great deal of gold. My tournaments, my feasts. The realm must see that the king is as generous as ever, mustn't they?" He gave a short laugh, which turned into a cough. "But the coffers are not as full as they used to be." Ned was painfully aware of the rumors that the crown was drowning in debt. Jon Arryn had died investigating something important, but whether it was the crown's finances, or something more sinister, remained to be seen. Ned's eyes darted toward Tywin. The Lannisters were known to be the wealthiest family in the Seven Kingdoms. He suspected that Tywin was here to ensure the debts owed by the crown to House Lannister were managed promptly, or else. "If the crown's finances are dire, your grace, I would recommend cutting back on unnecessary expenses," Ned said, choosing his words with care. He did not want to provoke Robert or Tywin. "The tournament to celebrate my appointment as hand. Perhaps we can postpone it? Or reduce its scale?" Robert frowned. "Postpone a tournament? The people would hate that. Gods, Ned. We must show them a king in full splendor, not a frightened miser." Tywin stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Your grace, the expenses for such events do weigh heavily. Yet a show of strength and generosity can quiet many a restless tongue. There are ways to manage the costs. I offer House Lannister's assistance as we have before." He let the implication hang in the air. Lannister gold, in exchange for Lannister influence. Ned felt a flicker of irritation, but he held his tongue. Robert, however, was oblivious or simply didn't care. He clapped Tywin on the shoulder, though he barely reached the older man's collarbone. Yes, good old Tywin. Always good for gold." He cast Ned a sidelong glance. "We'll figure out the details, Ned. Tonight we feast in your honor, and you will attend me, Tywin, and the rest of the court. Perhaps we can speak more of finances on the morrow." Ned inclined his head. "As you say, your grace." Despite his distaste for lavish spending, he dared not press Robert further, especially not in front of Tywin. He would have to think carefully on how to handle both the king's refusal to economize and Tywin's presence in the city. Later that evening, Ned settled into the austere Hand's chambers, large and grander than he would ever desire for himself. He found Sansa and Arya waiting for him in the sitting room, though they were bickering about something. Sansa wanted to attend a courtly function, while Arya complained it was all dresses and foolishness. The sight of them reminded Ned of simpler times, and his heart ached for Winterfell. This city would devour them if he was not vigilant. He knelt beside Arya. "My sweet girl, you must keep your sword lessons quiet. Do you hear? I'll arrange them with Syrio Farrell, but do not speak of it to the wrong ears." Arya beamed at him. Sansa pouted. "Father, the Queen invited me to a gathering with Princess Myrcella. May I go? I want to make a good impression." She wore her best southern courtesies like a new gown. It troubled Ned to see how quickly she adapted to the ways of the court, ways he did not fully trust. He ruffled her hair gently. "Yes, you may go, but mind yourself. Do not let your excitement blind you. Court is not the same as Winterfell. People here play at smiles, but their daggers are always drawn." Sansa nodded, though her eyes shone with a kind of girlish hope. "Yes, father." Ned left them to their business, each in a world so far from the other. He needed to prepare himself for the feast. He wondered if Cersei Lannister would be there, and how her father's presence might alter her usual manipulations. That notion pricked at him. If Cersei had something to hide, like the rumors about her children's parentage, would Tywin's watchful eye keep her from acting rashly? The feast was as grand as Robert had promised. Tables heaped with roasted boar and suckling pig, spiced wine and honey cakes. Laughter, music, the clanking of goblets. Nobles wore silks and velvets in a rainbow of colors, jostling to be seen, to trade rumor and gossip. Ned found himself seated near the king, which meant Tywin and Cersei were also close by. Cersei's green eyes gleamed, her golden hair shining in the torchlight. Though she wore a polite smile, Ned sensed the tension that simmered between her and Tywin. She addressed him carefully, calling him father with a delicate courtesy, as though mindful of some threat. Jaime Lannister, seated further down, exchanged idle conversation with Lord Tywin but seemed uncharacteristically subdued. Robert, for his part, roared with cheer, drinking, toasting, occasionally leering at passing serving girls. Ned felt uneasy, recalling the rumors that Cersei had been deeply displeased with Robert's infidelity, and with his squandering of the crown's treasury. Jon Arryn's mysterious death still weighed on Ned's mind. Would Tywin's presence deter Cersei from further secrets? Or would it drive her to more subtle means? She cast glances at her father from time to time, as though measuring his reactions. Halfway through the feast, Robert pulled Ned into a drunken embrace, nearly spilling wine on both of them. "Ah, Ned, if only you'd arrived sooner," he shouted over the music. "We might have avoided half the nonsense that plagues me. Tywin and I have spoken of forging an even stronger alliance through our families, perhaps a marriage arrangement down the line. If your children were old enough," he burped. "But we'll speak of that tomorrow." Ned forced a smile, though inwardly he cringed. He had no desire to marry any of his children to the Lannisters, not after everything he had heard. But he said nothing, allowing Robert his drunken ramblings. Tywin caught Ned's eye, and there was no warmth in that gaze. Ned took the hint. Tywin would be pushing for alliances soon, and Ned would be wise to tread carefully. As the night wore on, Ned sensed Cersei's restlessness. She whispered something to Robert, and the king let out a coarse guffaw, dismissing her with a wave. She stiffened, lips tightening. Then she looked away, focusing on her father. Tywin offered only a measured glance. Whatever conversation they shared was silent, conducted in the realm of disapproving frowns and subtle nods. Soon, Cersei rose from the table, excusing herself. Her father allowed her departure without comment. Ned, however, could not quite banish the feeling that something in her eyes spoke of thwarted plans, of a thwarted anger. Might she have had designs on harming Robert? The thought was unsettling, but not surprising. Yet with Tywin here, any chance of that, poison or otherwise, would be far too dangerous. Tywin Lannister's wrath was legendary, and Cersei was no fool when it came to self-preservation. When Ned retired to his chambers late that night, he could not sleep. He paced before the shuttered windows, gazing out occasionally at the lights of King's Landing. In his mind, he replayed every detail. Jon Arryn's death, the tidings from Winterfell that had drawn him here, Robert's extravagance, and Tywin's presence. He thought of the conversation he had overheard in the God's Wood earlier, between Varys and Illyrio Mopatis, or some rumor thereof, though that might have been in another timeline. In any case, he remained troubled by the secrets swirling about. One truth glimmered through all the uncertainties. Tywin Lannister being in King's Landing meant a shift in power, a tilt in the precarious balance that held the realm together. Cersei would not dare move openly against Robert now, not with Tywin observing her every breath. And so, for better or worse, the king's life was safer than it would have been otherwise. Morning brought no respite from that tension. Ned awoke early, determined to begin investigating Jon Arryn's final days. He had a short conversation with his daughters, ensuring that Sansa's trip to see Princess Myrcella would be accompanied by a suitable escort, and that Arya would continue her lessons with Syrio Farrell in secret. He left them with a kiss on the forehead each, thinking how ill-suited they were to this viper's nest. On his way to the small council meeting, Ned encountered Ser Barristan Selmy in the corridor. The old knight inclined his head respectfully. "My Lord Hand," he greeted. "I'm glad to see you well. The city can be complicated at times." Ned gave him a somber smile. "I have no doubt, Ser Barristan. Your presence here is a comfort." He glanced around, ensuring no eavesdroppers lingered. "Tell me, has Lord Tywin given any indication as to why he is truly here?" Ser Barristan hesitated. "He says it is to assist the king in matters of state. He claims the crown's debts to House Lannister must be reevaluated. But my guess is that he also wishes to keep a close eye on his daughter and grandchildren. A father's concern, perhaps, but also a strategist's vantage. I would urge caution in all dealings with him." Ned thanked the old knight and continued on. By the time he reached the council chamber, the others were already present. Grand Maester Pycelle, Lord Baelish, Lord Varys, and surprisingly, Tywin himself. Robert was absent, and so the meeting was theoretically Ned's to preside over, though Tywin's presence overshadowed that privilege. Ned took his seat at the head of the table, though his gaze flicked to Tywin, who sat calmly, his posture ramrod straight. "Shall we begin?" Ned said, voice measured. "The king has requested that we address the matter of the tourney to celebrate my appointment as Hand. The costs are substantial." Littlefinger offered a thin smile. "A trifling matter of 90,000 gold dragons? Or was it 100,000? It can be raised from certain tariffs or from, certain lenders." His mocking gaze darted to Tywin, but Tywin did not react. Tywin set his elbows on the table, steepling his fingers. "House Lannister is prepared to extend another loan, under terms that will be negotiated. The crown has already borrowed a great deal, so we must be prudent in how we proceed." Ned found himself growing tense. He did not like the idea of further entrenching the crown's debt to the Lannisters. "We are already too deeply in debt to House Lannister, as well as to others. Surely there must be a better way than simply borrowing again." "The king's commands are clear," Pycelle interjected in his slow, pompous manner. "He desires a splendid tourney. It would be unwise to deny his grace." Varys, hands folded in his voluminous sleeves, offered a slight bow of the head. "The small folk do enjoy such displays, my lord. It keeps them entertained and their minds away from potential unrest. But it is a steep cost indeed." Tywin turned his gaze to Ned. "As the Hand, you are responsible for making these decisions in the king's name. If you prefer to cancel the tourney, I would advise you speak with the king directly. If you choose to proceed, then the question of funding remains." There was no mockery in his voice, only cold fact. Ned realized that Tywin had placed him in a corner. If Ned canceled the tourney, he would anger Robert, risking the king's displeasure. If Ned continued, the crown would sink further into House Lannister's clutches. It was a no-win situation, precisely the sort that Tywin excelled at engineering. Ned held Tywin's gaze. "I will speak to the king about a compromise," he said finally. "Perhaps not canceling the tourney outright, but reducing its scale. The cost must be reined in, for the good of the realm." Tywin offered the barest nod. "Then we shall await your instructions." They proceeded to other matters. The grain shipments from the Reach, the tensions along the Dornish marches, and the ever-present risk of banditry in the Riverlands. Through it all, Ned found himself studying Tywin. The man's expression betrayed nothing, his tone never rising above that cool, level register. He was, in many ways, the perfect hand for a strong king. But Robert was not a strong king. He was strong only in battle, and these days he spent more time feasting and whoring than commanding. Tywin must have seen that. Perhaps that was why he had come, to ensure that House Lannister seized any advantage Robert's weaknesses provided. After the meeting, Ned tried to leave quietly, but Tywin stopped him in the hallway. Their eyes met, no guards or counselors in earshot. "Lord Stark," Tywin said, softly enough that only Ned could hear, "I understand that you value the realm's well-being, as do I, but be mindful that King Robert is easily swayed by emotion and flattery. He needs strong guidance. If we do not provide it, others will, and many of them do not have the realm's best interests at heart." Then, with a curt inclination of the head, Tywin turned and departed, leaving Ned with the unsettling notion that Tywin considered himself an ally of sorts, albeit a dangerous one. The next question was, an ally in what?